And welcome back to VR Troopers for the Sega Genesis Home Entertainment Console. I am Dane, and this is the Crack Lemonade channel. Welcome back. So, the first thing I do want to say is, I may have mentioned it in the X-Men video. There were technical difficulties with this game, and what happened was, this video, the first 10 seconds were corrupted, and I couldn't get it to open in both of my editing programs on my laptop. So I had to go and get on a Mac, and I was able to do it through Adobe Premiere Pro. The downside is that the audio is out of sync, and there really wasn't anything I could do about that in terms of just like writing that because of the sync issue. So I don't know if I mentioned this. When you fail in the battle grid, you have to fight the monster over again. So this also like extends the story, and I mean extends the game a bit, because you can't get a game over from the battle grid, so you just always fight the monster over. And if you always beat the monster and you're just stuck on the battle grid, then you're just playing the game until you decide to turn it off. And that kind of becomes the case later in the game. And I guess it's partially like me wanting to win and possibly see the ending, and you also finding out that like I can do that. Like, that's kind of cool. So I already talked about the plot of VR Troopers, and since the first video I probably watched like 1 or 2 more episodes, so like my plot and my overall opinion of VR Troopers that I stated in the first video hasn't changed. This week was actually kind of like a really good week in regards to this channel and just like coming up with ideas, because I have a bunch of games, and like I was just going through games and getting ideas of like, you know, what games have shows, like what shows I can watch, and you know, how can I build the connection with that. And it's just like it just really got like my juices flowing. And so I want to spend as much time as I can talking about other Saban series that I can't really talk about in other videos because there isn't a proper game for them. Overall, in regards to this game, I wish that this was like a side-scrolling action game instead of like a one-on-one fighter. And I also wish they didn't throw the Skugs in, because it kind of throws off the one-on-one gameplay, and the fact that like you can get surrounded, it kind of cheapens the fighting. So like, yeah, like the whole like, you know, surviving the time limit thing just becomes cumbersome, and it's not as fun as it should be. So last thing I'm gonna say about the VR Troopers is, if the show wasn't so similar to Power Rangers, I feel like it could have stood on its own. And I really recommend, if you haven't seen like the Cybertron pilot with Jason David Frank, you should watch it. And then you should watch VR Troopers, the show, on Netflix or Hulu. I think it's on Hulu, but like wherever you can watch it, because they didn't change anything. So, the villain I'm fighting, he can turn himself into anybody, and like he has a blast that also turns you into a random character, which is kind of cool. When you think about it, like you can fight as anybody, but again, don't really have that much plot to say about that. So yeah, if it was able to build an identity independent of the Power Rangers and not feel too much like the Power Rangers, it would have been great. The reason it got 2 seasons is because the suits look awesome. Big Bad Beetleborg suits look awesome. So commercially, people are gonna give into that hype, but you also have to build substance behind the hype, and that's what VR Troopers and Big Bad Beetleborgs fail to do. And kind of as I was saying earlier, like I was just like I was flowing with a lot of ideas. Right before I was setting this up, like I had a bunch of it dawned on me that like I have a lot to talk about, like about Power Rangers Zeo and Power Rangers Turbo and Power Rangers in Space, but none of those have like proper games to play. Power Rangers Zeo has a pinball game for the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation, and it also has like a racing game for the Super Nintendo, but I genuinely don't have an interest in getting either of those. So if I don't get to any of the topics that I want to get to, at some point later I will be playing Power Rangers Legends, the 15th anniversary game for the PS2, or Power Rangers Super Legends, whatever the name is. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but if I can't get to it, I will continue it in that video, continue this conversation in that video, because looking back on Power Rangers, especially the first 4 seasons, Mighty Morphin, first 5 seasons, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers through Turbo, there's a lot of things they could have did differently, and there's a lot of characters they really did dirty. And you know, it became a bit of a style, and it was a bit of a pattern that happened early on. And just looking back at it, it kind of made me uncomfortable to just be like, wow. But I don't know if I'm gonna get to talk entirely in depth about that in this video. So one of the main things I wanted to talk about was Big Bad Beetleborgs, and since there isn't a proper Big Bad Beetleborgs game for any system released in the United States of America, and I don't know if there's a Metal Heroes game released internationally, I don't know, but since there isn't, let me talk about that show real quick. The show uses the same dynamic as Big Bad Beetleborgs, which is a white male character, a white female, white male character, white woman character, and a black character. Big Bad Beetleborgs does the same thing, except they make them little kids, and it's 1,000 times worse because I don't know, like, watching Big Bad Beetleborgs again, I feel like if I ever liked this show, Saban low-key insulted my intelligence, because it's very dumb. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but it's very dumbed down. The dialogue is very dumb. The villains are very dumb. There's an episode where the villains eat dynamite because they think they're hot dogs. And, you know, if they're gonna be the main villains of the show, I feel like you should treat them with like more of a modicum of respect, so that, you know, the fans and the viewers can see them as legitimate threats instead of constant jokes. You can have one or two joke characters, but when your main evil force is nothing but joke characters, it dumbs down the show, and it felt like every episode was trying to tell a bad joke, and it didn't need to tell that joke. Overall, in Japan with Zyuranger, they started to experiment with having children in the show as like the Wicked Witch Bandora's victims, to bring and generate more appeal to the younger audiences. And honestly, it's kind of like, you know, like just watching different seasons of Super Sentai, they find a way to balance it out. But if you watch Zyuranger, which I have on DVD, sometimes the use of children as like Bandora's victims is kind of uncomfortable. And yeah, I mean, like, they tried different things. Zyuranger was the kids being the victims. Dairanger was the first child ranger, which we got years later in Power Rangers Turbo. And honestly, I want to get this out now in this video. Like, anybody who says, like, you know, the character Justin was like the worst thing about Power Rangers Turbo, chill. Because, like, I kind of feel like, in general, like, I think the acting in Big Bad Beetleborgs is bad, but I wouldn't go that far to like blame the kids. They're just doing their job, and they're delivering what was written for them. And it's hard to be critical on a child about like emotional range when you're at like that age and you don't have a lot of emotional development. The same thing goes with Blake Foster as Justin in Power Rangers Turbo. I'm not saying he was a terrible actor, and I'm not saying he didn't have like proper emotional development, but at the same time, he was put in a role that he probably shouldn't have been. They could have went with somebody who was older in his place, because having a child that can grow to a full-size adult like sounds good on paper, but it kinda isn't. It only goes so far, especially like if an adult is writing about a child and trying to make them seem childish. They're gonna come off as annoying and obnoxious, and a lot of people, actually I don't know. I don't know this is a fact, but I read online that the White Ranger from Dairanger wasn't liked as much because he was a kid. I watched Dairanger, and I do have to say the character Ko is very annoying. And he's annoying when he doesn't have to be. His backstory is actually very tragic, and it did like make me drop a few tears when I watched the show. But it didn't redeem for how annoying the character was, and how many times like they were just unnecessary situations that Ko, I'm hoping that's his name. It's been a while since I watched Dairanger, but the situations that the White Ranger got the rest of the Dairangers in, they were unnecessary. And a lot of just like how annoying he was unnecessary. Even though they tried to justify it through his backstory, it was still, you know, like, just because like a character has a crappy background doesn't mean that they're annoying, that them being annoying is any less forgivable. Especially if the character is introduced as annoying. And with that being said, I'm not saying that Justin in Power Rangers Turbo was annoying. I'm just saying it's hard for a child actor to like really gel with like a more teenage cast, and that's kind of what I felt not only about Dairanger but about Turbo. And to be quite honest, I kind of blocked out Power Rangers Turbo after the original team left. And since this video is kind of running to a close, I'm going to talk about that in when I get to Power Rangers Super Legends for the PlayStation 2, because I have a lot to say, and it has a lot to do with how they treated characters like Rocky, how they treated Billy, how they wrote off Aisha, and even the transition from Zeo to Turbo, and just my overall opinion about that. And yeah, the remaining time in this video is just not enough. So I'm on my last continue. I'm fighting Evil JB, which I think was a real thing in the show. I don't know, like, the villains come and go so quickly in VR Troopers. In every episode, there's like an army of monsters that Grimlord doesn't use, so it's really hard for me to remember specific villains. And none of them that face the VR Troopers last more than one episode. Grimlord lasts, and there's a monster called Ice Spot that returns regularly. But he's kind of like the coach of the monsters in the virtual world, so that doesn't really count. So yeah, so I keep losing to Clone JB, and I don't get to see the end of this story. I apologize for that, but I'm also gonna end the video right here, or at least end my commentary right here, because the video is gonna end soon. Thank you for watching. Please comment on anything I said. Like, I know I like give a lot of information, or gave a lot of information during this video, and I kind of jump from place to place, but I try to cover a lot in like a short period of time, and I try to talk about things relevant to the show, or I mean the source material behind this. Anyway guys, thank you for watching, and peace out.